This is not a story about ancient battles or dusty history. It is a case study in dominance, discipline, and direction. Alexander did not wait to be ready, validated, or supported. He acted first, learned through pressure, and corrected through consequence. While others hesitated, he advanced. While others negotiated safety, he accepted risk. His success was the predictable result of a man who refused to outsource responsibility for his life. The mindset before the empire. Alexander the Great did not wait for permission, readiness, or validation. While most men spend their youth being shaped by others, Alexander used his early years to shape himself into a ruler. By 16, he was already suppressing revolts. By 18, he was leading cavalry charges. At 20, he inherited a kingdom surrounded by enemies. And before the age of 30, he had erased every serious rival from the known world. This outcome was not the result of chance or prophecy. It was the product of a mindset forged through discipline, violence, and an obsessive pursuit of greatness. From childhood, Alexander was taught a single brutal principle: rule or be ruled. He was raised not for comfort, but for command. While others were trained to seek approval, he was trained to seek dominance. His education under Aristotle sharpened his intellect, but it was his exposure to war, authority, and consequence that hardened his character. He did not fear death the way ordinary men do. What he feared was insignificance. To Alexander, an unnoticed life was worse than a short one. He famously kept Homer's Iliad close at all times, not as literature, but as a manual for heroism and conquest. Achilles was not a myth to him, he was a standard. Alexander believed that a man's worth was measured by what he conquered: territory, enemies, fear, and ultimately, himself. Youth was never an excuse in his mind. When older men stood in his way, he did not negotiate with their experience. He dismantled it through strategy and force. This is not about battles or tactics. It is about the internal foundation that made those battles inevitable. Long before Alexander crossed into Asia or shattered empires, he had already destroyed weakness within himself. That internal conquest is where every empire begins, and it is the lesson most men avoid because it demands responsibility, sacrifice, and the willingness to stand alone. Alexander was not born disciplined. He was engineered through pressure, expectation, and relentless exposure to authority. At the center of this process stood his father, King Philip II of Macedon, a man who ruled through reform, military innovation, and force. Philip did not raise a son to be comfortable. He raised a successor who would either surpass him or be crushed by the weight of his shadow. From an early age, Alexander lived with the knowledge that power was not inherited safely. It had to be proven publicly and defended constantly. Philip's presence was both a gift and a burden. He demonstrated that kingdoms are built by men willing to impose order through violence when necessary. At the same time, he made it clear that blood alone was never enough. Alexander watched his father turn Macedon from a fractured state into a dominant military power through discipline, organization, and reform. This observation shaped Alexander's understanding of leadership. Authority comes from competence, not sentiment, and loyalty is earned through strength and results. Discipline for Alexander was not abstract philosophy, it was enforced reality. He trained with soldiers, rode horses meant to kill careless riders, and learned to command before he was allowed to enjoy status. The famous taming of Bucephalus was not a childhood anecdote. It was a demonstration of mindset. While others saw a violent, uncontrollable horse, Alexander saw fear itself and refused to submit to it. He identified the source of the problem, turned the horse toward the sun, and imposed control. That same mental pattern would later be applied to men, armies, and entire civilizations. Yet discipline alone does not create conquerors. Conflict does. Alexander grew up surrounded by political tension, assassination attempts, rival factions, and betrayal. His mother, Olympias, reinforced the idea that he was destined for greatness. But destiny without preparation is delusion. The pressure between his father's realism and his mother's ambition forged a personality that was both ruthless and visionary. He learned early that power attracts enemies and that hesitation invites replacement. By the time Philip was assassinated, Alexander was only 20 years old, but he was not unprepared. He moved immediately, eliminating rivals, securing loyalty, and demonstrating force without apology. This response revealed a critical truth. Discipline is proven only under pressure. Many men can perform in training. Few can act decisively when authority is threatened. Alexander did not hesitate, because his entire upbringing had conditioned him to understand that leadership delayed is leadership denied. This reveals a lesson most modern men resist. Discipline is not self-help or motivation. It is submission to a standard higher than comfort. Fathers, mentors, and systems that impose pressure are not obstacles. They are filters that remove weakness. Alexander did not become great because life was kind to him. He became great because he adapted faster than others under conditions that break most men. Alexander understood something most leaders never fully accept. Violence is not chaos, it is a tool. When applied decisively and intelligently, it creates order faster than negotiation ever can. He did not glorify brutality for its own sake, but he never pretended that power could be maintained without the willingness to destroy resistance. From the beginning of his reign, Alexander made it clear that defiance would be met not with compromise, but with overwhelming force. This reputation was not accidental. It was engineered to reduce future resistance before it could form. Risk was another principle Alexander embraced without hesitation. He consistently chose the option that carried the greatest danger but offered the greatest reward. Crossing into Asia with a relatively small army to challenge the Persian Empire was not reckless ambition, it was calculated aggression. Alexander understood that speed, initiative, and psychological dominance could offset numerical disadvantage. By advancing first, he forced his enemies into reactive positions, stripping them of confidence and control before swords ever clashed. On the battlefield, Alexander placed himself where risk was highest. He led charges personally, fought in the front lines, and accepted wounds as part of command. This was not theatrical courage, it was leadership economics. Men fight harder when they see their leader sharing the same danger. By exposing himself to risk, Alexander purchased absolute loyalty. His soldiers did not follow him because they were ordered to. They followed because he proved, repeatedly, that he would never ask them to face a danger he would not face himself. Violence, when delayed, multiplies cost. Alexander moved quickly against threats to prevent them from growing. Cities that resisted early were destroyed publicly, not out of cruelty, but as strategic messaging. Those that surrendered were spared and absorbed into his system. This contrast reinforced a simple equation across his expanding empire. Submission brought stability. Resistance brought annihilation. Fear, properly directed, became an instrument of peace. This exposes an uncomfortable truth. Progress, whether in war, leadership, or life, often requires confrontation. Men who avoid risk and conflict in the name of safety eventually lose control to those who do not. Alexander advanced first because he understood momentum. Once initiative is seized, it becomes a weapon as powerful as any army. Hesitation invites challenge. Decisive action eliminates it. Alexander's success was not built on recklessness, but on a clear-eyed acceptance of reality. Power does not reward the cautious observer. It rewards the man willing to move forward while others are still calculating outcomes. That willingness to step into uncertainty with force and intent is what separated Alexander from kings who ruled briefly and men who were forgotten entirely. Conquest alone does not create an empire. Control does. Alexander understood that destroying an enemy was only the first phase. The real challenge began after victory, when chaos, resentment, and fragmentation threatened to undo military success. Many kings could win battles, but few could convert those victories into lasting authority. Alexander approached empire as a system, not a series of wars, and loyalty was the currency that held that system together. He ruled through a calculated balance of fear, reward, and inclusion. Those who resisted him were crushed decisively, but those who submitted were often elevated rather than humiliated. Persian nobles were retained, local customs were respected, and administrative structures were preserved where they served his interests. This was not mercy, it was efficiency. Alexander understood that loyalty purchased through opportunity lasts longer than loyalty demanded through terror alone. At the same time, he never allowed familiarity to weaken authority. His inner circle was rewarded generously, but it was also held to absolute standards. Betrayal was met with immediate punishment, regardless of personal history. This created a culture where closeness to power was both a privilege and a risk. Men served Alexander not because they felt safe, but because they believed in his inevitability. He positioned himself not as a temporary ruler, but as the axis around which the world was reorganizing. Alexander also mastered symbolic control. He adopted elements of Persian dress and ceremony, not because he had abandoned Macedonian identity, but because symbols shape perception. By presenting himself as a legitimate successor to Persian kings, he reduced resistance and reframed conquest as continuity. Power that is recognized requires less enforcement. Alexander did not just defeat empires, he replaced them psychologically. This highlights a principle most men overlook. Loyalty is engineered, not requested. It is built through consistency, reward, consequence, and clarity of vision. Leaders who rely on charisma alone lose control the moment pressure appears. Alexander maintained control because his system did not depend on moods or popularity. It depended on structure. Everyone knew the rules, the rewards, and the penalties. Empire, in this sense, is not geography. It is order imposed at scale. Alexander's genius was not only in battle, but in his ability to bind diverse peoples into a functioning hierarchy under his command. Control, when applied intelligently, creates stability. And stability is what allows power to endure beyond the battlefield. Alexander understood that wars are not won by courage alone. Armies march on food, pay, equipment, and momentum, and without a functioning economic engine, even the greatest commander collapses. Unlike leaders who treated wealth as a byproduct of victory, Alexander treated it as a weapon. Every campaign was designed not only to defeat enemies, but to seize resources that would finance the next advance. Conquest funded conquest, creating a self-sustaining machine that grew stronger with every victory. Rather than relying on Macedon to support distant campaigns, Alexander forced the war to pay for itself. Captured treasuries, seized trade routes, and absorbed tax systems were immediately redirected into military logistics. This approach eliminated dependency and increased speed. He was not marching back and forth from home. He was building a mobile empire that carried its economy forward. Supply lines were secured not just with soldiers, but with administration and planning. Order followed the army as closely as violence preceded it. Alexander also understood incentives. Soldiers were paid well and rewarded visibly. Loot was distributed strategically to reinforce loyalty and morale, but never so freely that discipline eroded. Wealth flowed downward just enough to keep men invested in the mission, while ultimate control remained firmly centralized. This created an army that fought not only for survival or obedience, but for tangible gain. Men who profit from victory fight harder to protect it. Importantly, Alexander never confused wealth with indulgence. Resources were tools, not comforts. Excess was tolerated only when it reinforced authority or cohesion. When luxury threatened discipline, it was curtailed without hesitation. This balance separated Alexander from rulers who became prisoners of their own spoils. He accumulated immense wealth, yet remained operationally focused, always directing resources toward expansion, control, and stability. The lesson here is simple and unforgiving. Power without economics is temporary. Vision without supply collapses under pressure. Alexander succeeded because he respected the mechanics beneath ambition. He understood that domination requires infrastructure, and infrastructure requires wealth properly managed. Men who ignore this reality can win moments, but they never build legacies. Alexander's greatest strength was also his most dangerous trait: obsession. He did not view conquest as a phase or a duty. It was his identity. Stopping was never part of his psychology. Each victory only confirmed that further expansion was not only possible, but necessary. Where other rulers consolidated, Alexander advanced. Where others measured limits, he challenged them. This relentless drive is what allowed him to achieve what no one before him had, but it also planted the seeds of instability within himself and his empire. Over time, Alexander's sense of self fused completely with his role as conqueror. He was no longer merely king of Macedon or ruler of Asia. He saw himself as a world-shaping force. This belief fueled extraordinary confidence, but it also isolated him. As his power grew, fewer people were able to challenge him honestly. Advisors became cautious. Companions became subordinates. Authority expanded, but trust narrowed. Obsession demands sacrifice, and one of the first sacrifices is perspective. Physically and mentally, the cost accumulated. Years of campaigning, wounds, alcohol, and constant pressure eroded his judgment at times. Emotional outbursts, paranoia, and increasingly severe reactions to perceived disloyalty revealed cracks beneath the legend. Alexander remained dominant, but dominance maintained through exhaustion carries consequences. A man can outrun his enemies longer than he can outrun his own limits. Yet Alexander accepted this cost consciously. He did not seek balance, peace, or longevity. He sought immortality through action. To him, a short life filled with unmatched achievement was superior to a long life of managed decline. This is a philosophy few can tolerate, and even fewer can execute without collapse. Obsession, when aligned with purpose, creates history. When unchecked, it consumes the man who wields it. This presents an uncomfortable truth. Greatness is not free. It demands payment in comfort, relationships, and often health. Alexander paid that price willingly. The modern world often celebrates outcomes while ignoring costs, but Alexander never confused the two. He understood that to move faster and further than anyone else, he would burn more intensely and burn out sooner. Alexander's death was sudden, unresolved, and strategically catastrophic. At just 32 years old, after more than a decade of continuous campaigning, the man who had reshaped the known world was gone. There was no clear successor, no stabilized system capable of functioning independently of his presence, and no authority strong enough to replace the gravitational pull of his leadership. What followed was not merely political fragmentation, but a lesson in how power decays when it is too closely tied to one individual. Alexander had built an empire that relied on his personal command, judgment, and momentum. While his generals were brilliant, none possessed the combination of legitimacy, vision, and fear that Alexander embodied. His authority was not institutionalized, it was personalized. When the man disappeared, the structure lost coherence. The result was inevitable: division, conflict, and the carving of the empire into competing kingdoms by men who had once served the same cause. This collapse does not diminish Alexander's greatness, it clarifies its nature. He was not a bureaucrat or a system builder in the modern sense. He was a force of acceleration. His purpose was to conquer, unify, and move forward at a pace that made long-term consolidation secondary. Stability was expected to follow dominance, but without the central figure to enforce alignment, ambition replaced loyalty. The empire did not fail because Alexander was weak. It failed because he was irreplaceable. Legacy, in Alexander's case, was not measured by duration, but by impact. His campaigns reshaped cultures, economies, and identities across continents. Greek language, ideas, and systems spread deep into Asia, altering history permanently. Even in collapse, the world he created could not return to its previous state. That is the mark of true power, change that cannot be undone, even after control is lost. This chapter delivers a final warning and a final lesson. Empires, businesses, and movements built entirely around one man can move faster than anything else, but they are also fragile when that man disappears. Immortality through action is real, but it comes with trade-offs. Alexander accepted them. He did not design for a world without himself because his goal was never preservation. It was domination. Alexander did not conquer the world alone, but he never allowed anyone around him to forget who stood at the center of power. His generals were among the most capable military minds of the ancient world, men hardened by decades of war, discipline, and ambition. Yet Alexander structured his leadership in a way that ensured competence was rewarded, without ever allowing equality to emerge. Talent was encouraged. Rivalry was tolerated. Independence was not. He understood a fundamental truth about elite men. Strong subordinates are necessary, but unchecked equals become threats. Alexander kept his generals in a state of controlled competition, balancing rewards and responsibilities so that no single man accumulated enough power to challenge him directly. Victories were shared, but ultimate credit flowed upward. This system kept his command structure sharp, aggressive, and focused, while preventing unity against him from ever forming. Loyalty was reinforced through proximity and shared hardship. Alexander ate with his men, marched with them, and exposed himself to the same dangers. This created emotional allegiance, not just professional obedience. At the same time, he enforced strict boundaries. When loyalty wavered or disrespect appeared, even from long-time companions, punishment was swift and public. Personal history did not override authority. This clarity prevented confusion about where allegiance truly lay. However, this model carried long-term consequences. By centralizing legitimacy so completely in himself, Alexander ensured that his generals were loyal to the man rather than to an enduring institution. While this produced extraordinary effectiveness during his lifetime, it left no unifying principle after his death. Rivalry, once controlled by Alexander's presence, exploded into open conflict. The very ambition he had harnessed became destructive in the absence of restraint. The lesson is sharp and practical. Leaders must decide whether they are building systems that outlast them or forces that depend entirely on their will. Alexander chose speed, dominance, and historical impact over continuity. His management of elite men was brilliant for conquest, but fragile for succession. Power concentrated too tightly accelerates results, but it also accelerates collapse once pressure is removed. Alexander did not allow the world to define him. He defined himself first, and then forced the world to agree. This is where most men fail. They wait for external validation before acting, but Alexander operated in reverse. He cultivated myth deliberately about his lineage, his destiny, and his inevitability, because he understood a brutal psychological truth. Men follow certainty, not humility. By presenting himself as more than human, he removed hesitation in others and doubt in himself. Alexander claimed descent from Achilles and Zeus, not because he needed superstition, but because identity shapes behavior. A man who believes he is ordinary behaves cautiously. A man who believes he is destined behaves aggressively. Alexander used belief as fuel. Every battle reinforced the story, and the story reinforced the next battle. This feedback loop is what turned confidence into dominance. He was not pretending. He was committing fully to an identity that demanded action. For modern men, the lesson is direct and uncomfortable. If you see yourself as harmless, replaceable, or average, you will live accordingly. Alexander believed a man should be dangerous, capable of violence, discipline, and decisive action, even if he chooses restraint. Harmless men are tolerated, not respected. Dangerous men who control themselves command space, attention, and authority. Alexander's myth was not about fantasy. It was about psychological positioning. He understood propaganda before the word existed. Stories of his victories traveled faster than his armies, breaking resistance before contact. Men surrendered because they believed resistance was pointless. This is power applied at the mental level. In modern life, Men who control narrative about their competence, standards, and boundaries rarely need to argue. Weak men explain themselves endlessly. Strong men move and let outcomes speak. Alexander's construction of immortality was not arrogance, it was strategy. He aimed to live in a way that could not be ignored or erased. Most men aim for comfort and are forgotten within a generation. Alexander aimed for impact and achieved permanence. This chapter forces a hard question. Are you living in a way that demands memory, or in a way that seeks approval? Masculinity, at its core, is about responsibility for outcome. Alexander accepted that responsibility fully. He did not outsource belief, identity, or direction. He decided who he was, acted in alignment with that decision, and accepted the consequences without complaint. That is the standard modern men avoid, and the reason so few ever rise above obscurity. Alexander's life was a direct rejection of comfort. At every stage where consolidation, rest, or pleasure was available, he chose movement, pressure, and expansion instead. This was not because he lacked access to luxury, but because he understood what comfort does to men over time. Comfort dulls urgency, erodes discipline, and slowly replaces hunger with entitlement. Alexander recognized that ease is the natural enemy of dominance, and he structured his life to avoid it. Pressure, by contrast, was his preferred environment. Constant campaigning forced rapid decision-making, personal accountability, and continuous adaptation. There was no room for passivity. Every delay created vulnerability, and every weakness was punished by reality. This is why pressure creates kings. It exposes incompetence quickly and rewards men who can carry weight without collapsing. Alexander thrived under this strain because his identity was built around endurance and command, not balance or safety. Modern men are surrounded by comfort engineered to reduce friction, convenience, distraction, and false security. These conditions produce men who are technically informed but practically weak, opinionated but ineffective. Alexander's world offered none of these buffers. Every action carried consequence. This environment forged decisiveness. Men today must recreate pressure deliberately if they want similar results. Without imposed difficulty, discipline decays into intention without execution. Alexander's refusal to settle also reinforced authority. His men followed him because stagnation was never allowed. Forward movement created meaning, momentum, and loyalty. A leader who stops advancing invites doubt. A man who remains hungry inspires belief. Comfort communicates completion. Pressure communicates purpose. Alexander chose purpose repeatedly, even when it demanded sacrifice. The core lesson is clear. Men do not rise to the level of their goals. They fall to the level of their standards under pressure. Comfort lowers standards quietly. Pressure reveals them violently. Alexander's greatness was not an accident of history, but the predictable outcome of a man who rejected ease and embraced strain as the cost of power. Alexander lived in a world where emotional mistakes were fatal, not embarrassing. Anger, hesitation, or insecurity at the wrong moment could collapse an army or invite rebellion. For this reason, discipline over emotion was not a philosophical ideal for him, it was a survival requirement. While he was capable of intense feeling, rage, loyalty, grief, he understood that a leader who allows emotion to dictate action eventually loses authority. Alexander trained himself to act according to objective outcomes rather than internal states. In battle, fear was acknowledged but never obeyed. In leadership, affection was allowed but never permitted to override judgment. This separation between feeling and decision is what allowed him to remain effective under extreme stress. Men followed him because his responses were predictable in principle, even when events were chaotic. Emotional volatility erodes trust. Disciplined consistency builds it. This lesson is especially relevant for modern men, who are increasingly encouraged to center identity around emotion. While emotional awareness has value, emotional submission does not. Alexander did not deny emotion, he subordinated it. When leaders react impulsively, they communicate weakness and invite challenge. When men pause, assess, and act deliberately, they project control. Control, not likability, is the foundation of authority. That said, Alexander was not immune to emotional failure. Moments of unchecked anger led to irreversible consequences, including the killing of close companions. These incidents serve as warnings rather than contradictions. They demonstrate that even the most dominant men pay heavily for lapses in discipline. Power amplifies mistakes. The higher a man rises, the more costly emotional weakness becomes. Men who cannot govern themselves cannot govern anything else. Discipline is not suppression, it is command. Leaders are not emotionless, but they are never emotion-led. Alexander's legacy reinforces a rule that applies across centuries. Authority begins with self-control, and it collapses the moment emotion takes the throne. Alexander the Great was not exceptional because he lived in a different era. He was exceptional because he accepted a standard most men reject in every era. He took full responsibility for outcome, identity, and direction, and he never outsourced those burdens to comfort, consensus, or circumstance. His life demonstrates a pattern that repeats relentlessly across history. Men who pursue ease disappear, and men who accept pressure reshape the world around them. What made Alexander dangerous was not only his military ability, but his internal alignment. His beliefs, actions, and tolerance for pain were synchronized toward a single objective. He did not divide his life between ambition and indulgence. He understood that power demands coherence. Modern men often fracture themselves, wanting results without sacrifice, authority without discipline, and respect without competence. Alexander accepted none of these contradictions. This story is not about copying his conquests or glorifying violence. It is about recognizing the psychological framework that made those conquests inevitable. Alexander believed weakness was a liability, discipline was non-negotiable, and momentum was sacred. He embraced risk, controlled emotion, rejected comfort, and acted decisively while others hesitated. These principles are not ancient, they are permanent. The modern world does not lack opportunity. It lacks men willing to endure pressure long enough to capitalize on it. Wealth, leadership, and dominance still flow toward those who can delay gratification, withstand isolation, and impose structure on chaos. Alexander's life proves that greatness is not granted by time period or privilege, but by standards upheld consistently under stress. The final lesson is simple and unforgiving. History does not remember intentions, it remembers results. Alexander chose to live in a way that demanded memory. even at the cost of peace and longevity. Every man must decide where he stands on that spectrum. Comfort offers safety and anonymity. Pressure offers risk and legacy. Alexander chose legacy and paid the price willingly. The question left is not whether his path was extreme. The question is whether you are prepared to carry even a fraction of that weight, or whether you will choose to be comfortable and forgotten. If you're here for more than entertainment, subscribe and stay. This channel exists for men who are done being passive observers of their own lives. Men who understand that strength is built, wealth is structured, and dominance is earned. History rewards those who act. Decide which side of that line you stand on, and move accordingly.